Yep, not defending Apple today. For those of you who are new to the channel or maybe don't know me very well, while I make myself out to be the Apple sheep of the internet, I defend Apple only when I believe they are in the right. That's not all the time. Quite often the media will have you believe that Apple is always wrong and basically everything they do is a terrible thing. I don't find that to be true, but I still think they make mistakes and they are wrong occasionally. And for the sake of proving that to you guys, I want to complain about something hypocritical that Apple has been caught doing red-handedly recently, and that is analyzing Siri interactions. For those of you who didn't know about the story, it sounds like occasionally Apple would take the interchanges you had with Siri and would analyze thousands of them a day, and they would be graded by contract workers, not even people who worked inside at Apple, by other companies. They would have other people listen to them and grade them based upon if Siri did a good job or if Siri messed up or went off when she wasn't supposed to. And now people who actually got to listen to those recordings are coming forward and saying, we heard quite a bit of private personal information. There's a lot to unpack here, so let's begin. So, you know, it'd be easy for me to take the low-bearing fruit and to just make videos about all the times people complain about Apple, and I don't think it makes any sense or there's any justification for it. Like, most recently, people will upload, like, hour-long videos about why the Apple Card is terrible because leather rubs off on it, without anybody truly realizing that basically any wallet with cheaply made leather is going to ruin your credit cards or debit cards over time. This is not an Apple-specific issue, but because Apple was the type of company with the balls to say, hey, by the way, here's how you clean your Apple Card, and also if you use it with these types of wallets, then it will mark up over time. Then everyone goes nuts because headlines are great that say, can't even use Apple Card with leather wallet. This is not an inherent to Apple problem. It's just that Apple tried to get ahead of the complaints and say, hey, by the way, you might want to consider using a different wallet if you want to preserve the cleanliness of your credit card, which is free. Also, if it gets marked up over time and you want a brand new one, it doesn't cost you anything to request a new one. It's embarrassing how desperate people will get to complain about Apple, but that's low-bearing fruit. I don't think it would be that interesting of a video because the answer is just too painfully obvious in my mind that it's not worth talking about at all. What not a lot of people are talking about is the fact that Apple is so proud and in fact advertises so often the fact that they prioritize privacy. They're willing to spend tens of thousands of dollars likely on these giant billboards that say, what happens on your iPhone stays on your iPhone. And at their events, they brag about how private they keep things and how secure everything is so that third parties can't access your personal information. But now that this news story is coming out about how they were willing to send off thousands of Siri recordings with personal data inside them, as in your voice or whatever question you're asking Siri, or even if you weren't even calling out to Siri, you just happened to say something or do something that set Siri off, if it was just a little bit of a bizarre interchange, that recording was then sent off to people in other countries just so that they could analyze it. And now those contractors are coming forward and saying, hey, by the way, we heard some quite personal stuff when we were analyzing all these recordings. Now, if this was any other company, most people would not be too shocked. If they found out that the Google speakers were sending back recordings of interchanges people had, you'd be like, yeah, you know, Google does a lot of user tracking and they like having personal user data, so I understand it. And I think most people would even understand it with an Amazon Echo product. They're like, oh yeah, Amazon wants that user data, so they send those recordings back and they analyze them. But most hearing that Apple would be doing those things, I think would be somewhat surprised, because for the longest time, we've always had the understanding that maybe Siri isn't as good as Google or the Echo Assistant because it doesn't get as much recording and user data track. So you kind of take the compromise of Siri not being as smart because at least Siri is more secure, and Apple's not analyzing all of your conversations and taking the recordings that you have with that smart product and sending it back to Apple, and then Apple sending it to other companies. That is an extremely hypocritical move by Apple. Lots of companies do hypocritical things. I try to call them out for it, so today's video is no exception. It just happens to be the company that I love and care about a lot. Now, personally, I've come to expect that most technology isn't as secure as we may think it is, and the fact that I've had lots of interchanges with Siri, and there's a good chance that some of those have been sent off and maybe even listened to by other people, doesn't convince me that I need to stop buying an Apple product, mostly because I know there's not some other smart speaker or there's not some other digital assistant I can use that will somehow be way more secure and private. But if Apple was aware of this and Apple knew full well that they were sending off these recordings, then I would say kind of dial back on the privacy advertising. Apple has since suspended these grading reports and has said that they're going to add the feature to opt out of these recordings so you can make sure everything stays secure. But with how Apple usually handles privacy, I feel like it shouldn't be a feature you have to manually opt out of. This should be a feature you have to opt into. Kind of like when you first set up your iPhone and it asks you, do you want to share some app data with developers? And you have the option of saying yes or no. So if you say yes, that means that app developers can kind of see crash reports or how you use your product so that they can make it better. It's not something that's on by default and then you have to go into settings and turn off. I feel like Apple should treat Siri the same way. If you need to have real humans and real people, whether they're at Apple or contracted from other companies, listening and grading to our own personal conversations, then make it something people opt in for, or maybe even provide a reward out there for people who are willing to compromise their privacy, especially when Apple spends so much money on saying that they're the secure product. When you buy Apple, you know that your data stays private and you need to not even worry about who's accessing whatever data or whatever conversations you're having with Siri. To then go behind everyone's back and just kind of straight up lie in several aspects, I think is completely unacceptable. It's sad that they kind of fall in place with everyone else, because I know tons of other companies do the exact same thing. I mean, it was recently discovered that even Xbox consoles were like recording conversations with their user and sending them back to Microsoft. Apple was supposed to be the company that didn't do this. You know, they were the ones who disgrace Facebook and say, no, you don't need all that user data. But while what Apple did with Siri wasn't probably to the same extent of what Facebook or Google does with user data tracking or selling it to other people, Apple wasn't exactly selling it to other people. They were just analyzing it for its own improvement. But either way, it's quite hypocritical for them to brag about the privacy so much while still analyzing people's individual conversations. So I would say you gotta find a way out of this, and something has to change. You either have to dial back on the privacy advertising and start saying, you know, we do take a look at certain Siri recordings and being upfront with their customers, or maybe you need to find some kind of algorithmic or machine learning way to improve Siri without individual people from other countries listening in on Siri conversations and hearing all of that personal information that could be going on behind the scenes. Find a way to do that very much internally so you don't have to contract other people to analyze it, or even better, just find a way to improve it on your own so you don't have to sacrifice the end user's privacy at the end of the day. That way you can keep bragging about your privacy and say like, hey, we try to make Siri better without analyzing everyone's personal conversations. But again, they've already done that, so kind of the damage has already been done. I still think Apple is probably one of the best companies out there in regards to security and privacy, but now we know they're not completely guilt-free when it comes to keeping people's personal information private, as it's very, very likely that these contractors have heard plenty of conversations that they weren't really supposed to, conversations between people or interactions with Siri that may have been very, very personal that all of Apple's users were expecting weren't being sent off somewhere else and weren't being listened to by real people. It was just an interchange with a digital assistant and a user, and I think Apple should be ashamed of that. I really do not think that what they did was okay, and I hope they can learn from this, and I hope that if they expect us to see them as the privacy-focused company and the security-based company that they always brag so much about, they have to walk the walk if they're going to talk the talk. So, not okay, Apple, and not okay, Siri. This isn't gonna make me switch to an entirely different ecosystem if that's what you were hoping for, but that doesn't mean I have to support everything Apple does. That's something they did that I do not support and makes me really annoyed at them for being so hypocritical. Anywho, let me know what you think of Apple analyzing Siri conversations, whether or not they need to extinguish that entirely or make it an opt-out basis or maybe an opt-in basis, I think would be better. If you want to analyze our conversations to make Siri better, let people toggle in for that. I mean, I don't care too much about my privacy personally. I know that there's so much user data being tracked around anyway, so that's probably something I would even opt in for. It's not so much that I'm worried that Siri picked up something really, really personal and that there's someone maybe across the world that heard a personal interchange of mine. That doesn't bother me so much. It's more about the hypocrisy, but if you want to talk more about it, feel free to hit me up over on Twitter or join our Discord. This is your Apple Sheep here, and I'll see you guys in the next one.